So I'm a bit humbled because what I'm going to present is a mixture of something I did a few years ago with a perspective on a new twist on the topic. So I hope it's not too random, but I feel like it connects pretty nicely to the presentation before, since I'm also thinking about, or that tipped me off, the explainability of AI. So this is what I mean by transparency. How can we deal with the black box problem? How can we deal with giving explanations about decisions made by an AI? And the problem, in my view, gets harder when we look at the development of technology in the sense of ubiquitous computing and embodied computing, meaning that technology becomes even more invisible. So we have like two layers of invisibility. One is the problem of explanation of processes, underlying processes, and we have the presence of technology, the vanishing of technology into surfaces, into our bodies. So okay, let me start by looking at transparency, and so I have to say it's a philosophical reflection, so it's not going to get very technical. So let's look at transparency in its dialectical form. So one notion of transparency is what we call explainability. So that's key to democratic processes. We want to give reasons for decisions, make them transparent, and we have the right to understand the coming about of decisions concerning, for example, our private life or legal decisions. Now we have the first central question: is a computational process that underlies a decision made by an AI comparable to a process of reasoning? So do we have are we talking on the same dimension here, in a sense? So if we ask a judge what his or her reasons are for making a decision, then we will get some arguments and we will get some narrative about what reasoning and what moral aspects and so on led to decision X, Y, Z. A computational process does not consist of moral considerations, of intuition or the like. So one working question would be whether these processes could even be compared on the same plane, so to say. Now, if we look into neuroscience and also phenomenology of consciousness or cognition, we have a different kind of transparency, which is the opposite of transparency concerning reasons. This is a transparency that hides something. So, for example, the German philosopher Thomas Metzinger talks of the self as a model that comes about through underlying neural processes, that is constituted through neural processes, and the nature of the self being a model is transparent. So our identity for us is a substantial thing. It is a real thing. But by nature, if we go along with his idea, it has the character of being a model or a higher order representation. And this is transparent to us. We look at ourselves, but we don't see how the self is constituted and of what nature, epiphenomenal nature in that case it is. Also, functioning of AI is based in non-conscious cognitive processes. This is something that relates human cognition and artificial cognition, because in both cases we have a substantial part of the computation and information processing goes on underneath the level of accessibility. In AI, accessibility would mean the output. In human cognition, accessibility means awareness of something. And all these underlying processes that constitute output and awareness are not accessible or only in part, maybe in case of AI, accessible to understanding and to observation. So we have this dialectics I was talking about in my heading. Dialectics of transparency means that we have a growing transparency of AI processes. So that means we cannot really understand how they modulate, say, our life world. And this is necessary because if we want an AI to work, we need all these hidden processes. And the question then is, when it comes to legal problems, how can we make this necessary transparency transparent in a legal sense or in an existential sense to understand the reasons and so on? And to repeat what I said in the beginning, so we have the phenomenon of the disappearing technology. So if you look at ambience computing and of Internet of Things, we see that, for example, urban environments are more and more enmeshed with technologies that are sensing, that might choreograph our movement in urban spaces. And we are not aware of this, or not only in parts aware of it. So if you come home and you talk to Alexa, say, please put on the lights, please put on the heating and turn on some music, you have this one device that you can talk to that is materialized. But on the other hand side, you have no idea of the connectedness of the different smart devices, in a sense. So you move in a fabric of digital technology, of which only a very, very tiny part comes to your attention. And if we go one step further to embodied computing, which is an umbrella term for wearables, digital skins, digital tattoos, microchips implanted somewhere, and even in the future nanobots that might gather data from your vitals, and up until the idea that you could monitor thoughts and emotions through something like ingestibles or implantables. Here we have an even stronger transparency in the sense of that data is gathered that even to us as embodied beings is not focus of our attention, or can't even can't even be observed by ourselves. And what is generated there is an image of ourselves that consists of data that are normally hidden from us, like our vital signs, maybe the onset of affects, and so on. And this image is probably then communicated, for example, to devices like your mobile phone, and you will see something that is like a data double of yourself. But you have no access to how this data is aggregated, how it is in a sense digested, and it will probably in the future be more important to us than our proprioception. So if you feel like you're getting sick, today you would trust the signals of your body. You would maybe recognize, okay, that's just a cold that's coming. So I have a runny nose. That's fine. I'll just do this and that and maybe relax for a day and I'm going to be okay. Probably in the future, if we rely more and more of such an externalization of ourselves, we might not rely anymore on proprioception, but on an image that is generated by data gathering devices within ourselves, whose functioning is even more detached from us than the functioning of our everyday contemporary devices like the mobile phone, for example. So another set of problems is if we come from the problem that we can really explicate what is happening in a self-learning AI, because the processes are too complex and too interconnected to make them fully explicit. And even if we could make them fully explicit, we are still running into the problem whether this would count as an explanation for reasons for a decision. So as was nicely pointed out before, if we showed this chart we saw within a process to someone who has done a crime, if we try to explain the decision that comes about for an AI, a legal AI, and we saw this chart with some characteristics of what happened and certain points where emphasis was placed through the AI, and that would not probably feel like a real explanation. So we don't only have the problem of the complexity, we also have the problem of translating computational processes into reasons. And then we have, in the next step, embodied computing, we have the problem of entering technology into our bodies and breaking down the barrier of technology and the bodily self, which is in post-human sense, I would say, an interesting thing to do. So I wouldn't be completely adverse or skeptic of trying that. But we saw also in the presentation of Susan Schneider, we don't have really proof of whether what we are implanting, the technology we are inserting into our bodies, is really the right stuff to achieve qualitative, desirable experience, or would we just achieve either problems with our body or a simple device for data harvesting, so to say. And one of the biggest legal problems with such body closed devices is the usage of third-party applications of this data. So it is a problem or even a fallacy to believe that we could govern the way how our data is used. We can't do it now with the cell phone. We can not do it also with microchips that are inserted into our brain. So we will have this layered landscape of your body, of a connection to some kind of cloud where data is gathered, and then a distribution of this data to diverse institutions of, say, medical institutions or lifestyle applications, or even legal institutions. So that is something that has to be resolved, and it adds to the pretty strong transparency that we already observe. So just again, the problem, so we have, if we speak about transparency in decision-making processes, we speak, and this is now the phenomenological part, we speak about visibility. We make something visible, we bring something to the fore. While in the functional transparency of technology, we exclude visibility. Transparency here means we cannot see what is going on. And seeing in philosophy, looking at philosophy of technology is a problem when we look into the famous analysis of Heidegger on modern technology in his question concerning technology. There he is talking about yet another layer of transparency and visibility through technology, because he does not talk of concrete or special forms, diverse forms of technological devices or forms of technology, but he looks at technology in general. And the way we are talking now about AI and digital technology is maybe similarly abstract, like Heidegger is talking about modern technology. So what is his idea? His idea is that technology is not something that consists of devices that are human-made for a certain purpose. That's the standard definition, the instrumental definition. So we use tools to for some purpose, and so on. This is true in the standard view of technology, but the question is what is technology in itself? So he's speaking of the essence of technology. And if we look deeper, he looks for a logic of technology. And this logic he finds in the idea that technology is a way of making the world appear, a way of revealing the world in a certain way. So that means in modern times for Heidegger, if we want to go along with the idea of modern versus an old style of technology, an old way to use technology, which you don't have to subscribe to. But the idea is that with the ubiquity of technology in modern times, we came to a point where we are subscribing to a worldview through technology that reveals the world only as a standing reserve, only as something that is at our disposal. That's another way to think about the Anthropocene, basically. So where the idea was that we can actually master nature in order to ensure a good life for all humans, which has failed horribly. But the idea that technology does hide its character of being an enabler to see the world is yet another form of transparency. So if we go along with Heidegger saying that technology is a kind of medium that represents the world to us in that style of standing reserve, of making things available to us, which is very dominant in the contemporary usages of AI and usages of applications. So we feel like we gain something, but then again, we as users are also turned into a standing reserve, because what's valuable in the whole process is the data that comes from the user and goes into the application, and not the benefits of the application given to the user. So basically, we have an analogy between what Chalmers presented 2 days ago, that technology is shedding a light on philosophy. Here, technology sheds a light, or even gives us certain glasses that we can't do away with to see the world. And the question is whether we can have a look at these glasses, whether we can materialize the optics that technology gives us. So how am I doing in time-wise? Okay, I think I'm still okay.
Time, no worries.
Good. So so this is a very deterministic view on technology. So if we go along with Heidegger, we have technology as that medium that determines us to see the world along the lines of productivity, optimization, and having things at our disposal. And the fact that technology can do that because it hides its nature of being such a medium. We have a kind of a one-sided relation in the image of we being determined by, in our world perception, by technology. So let's take, or let's change the perspective a bit and look into Merleau-Ponty. Merleau-Ponty is not a big philosopher of technology, but his analysis of the perceptual world is an interesting fundament to start thinking about visibility, invisibility, or transparency of technology. So if you think about his later writings, where he talks, it's called The Invisible and the Visible and the Invisible. And there he states not only that subject and object, or humans relating to the world, is something that is in constant coevolution. That also means that humans with technology are in a process of constant coevolution, co-influence. But also these more, say, logical dichotomies of the visible and the invisible, of transparency and intransparency, those are not, in a sense, a follow-up, that we have a transparency that hides something, and thus we don't have access to, say, underlying processes of computation here. But he thinks the logic of the visible and the invisible as something that is asynchronous or a coexistence, because without something being invisible, we couldn't see something, we couldn't have something, so we couldn't have a visibility. And that is drawn from his logic of embodiment. So if you take the body as constitutive of perception, that means the body situates the subject within a life world, within an environment. The body has also a type of thing character. So it is in a way similar or the same as the object that appear within the perceptual world. So we have a strong connection with those things that appear in our perception, because we are also a perceptible thing. And so we have an encroachment or a chiasm of this perspective of being situated, meaning having a perspective. A perspective always means something is visible while something other is invisible. So nothing is given as a whole. So if I look as the phenomenologist I am, I have my cup of tea, then you see a sight and you intend there's a cup of tea, but actually other perspectives of it are hidden from view. And the only reason why we think we have a whole thing at presence here is that we could potentially move about and see the hidden perspectives. So we have this necessary encroachment of the visible and the invisible. And now if we bend all these this thinking back to the question of technology and of transparency, we can ask whether we, in this way, can get out of this tunnel that Metzinger described, of the self being just a model that is transparent to our recognition. How can we get out of this ego tunnel? How can we get out of the predicament of dealing with existential processes, be it within ourselves or within AI, that make us feel like we are subjected to something that we can never bring in front of our eyes. And so with Merleau-Ponty, we have this idea that if you look at this concept of the flesh that he is promoting, all of these dichotomous relations are present. They are enmeshed within the life world. So we don't have these ontological planes that we cannot access. In his idea, we can, through embodied cognition, relies on these this co-presence of visibility and invisibility. So now if we ask about access, maybe there's yet another problem. If we follow phenomenological thinking into post-phenomenology, and we have Don Idey's idea of the various relations that we can have with technology. We have, I name 3 here that are relevant. So first of all, technology can be an embodiment relation. So like if you're using a tool, you use a hammer, and the hammer becomes an extension of your body. And if it functions well, then it is incorporated within your body scheme. Similar things goes for extended mind theory, when you say something like your notebook becomes a constitutive part of your memory. Then you can think about technology as a heuristic relation that makes you see the world, a hidden world that you haven't seen before. Like if you look at cells in a microscope, then technology enables you to see a part of reality that is not usually given without technology. That's not existed through our normal senses. And both of these are, I would say, the ways in which we view technology as being around us. But with the growing transparency of AI and especially embodied computing, it might happen that we are not even aware of technology in that sense of extensions of the body or of our senses, but it might become a background relation. Background relation is meaning that if we use technology, just like the thermostat and my heating here, that modulates my living room, the atmosphere of my living room, but it is in a sense a technology that is not existentially so relevant, because it's just something that gives another touch to your atmosphere. Let's think about if a data-heavy technology that it's basically the goal is to connect everything with everything, so meaning also our innermost life to the data highway. If that becomes something like a background relation because we don't even notice the functioning anymore, then the problem gets even harder. And we have tendencies where we can see that's probably happening, because most of these close-to-body AIs that we're using are communicated to the wider public through fashion, through fashionable objects. And fashion is something that tends also to hide more existential problems in those devices, because we regard it as something, as an add-on, and not as something that has these strong impacts on our lives. Like even such a smart tattoo is more or less a fashion object rather than perceived of as something that could have serious consequences for the way we lead our lives. So let me see where I am. Yes, the question would be, how would we approach the problem? So how could we actually make something visible or transparent in the legal sense that is so hidden from view? And usually we only notice what's happening in using technology, or we reflect on using technology if it breaks down. So if your computer doesn't do what you want, you're going to scream at it, and suddenly you notice, okay, I have to understand what's going on in that device in order to fix it. So the transparency of digital objects only gets into view through disruption, through friction. But friction does not lead to an explanation of underlying processes. So we are not yet on the plane of reasons here. We are just on the plane of restoring function. So what could we suggest for the future to develop a more emancipatory access to technology? And that would be, first of all, fostering digital literacy. So to communicate from early on, to make children more acquainted with programming, with computing, that would be an educational problem. And if people were more educated in the basic functions of smart technologies, then the chances are that we do not just adhere to standard uses, but we are capable of tinkering with technology, of what in post-phenomenologist terms would be called multi-stability. Technology can be either through changes in the social perception, or also through active tinkering with technology, can be used in interesting ways, in creative ways, in maybe more democratic ways, by enabling people to understand what's actually happening, and then maybe govern data flows, or deciding which information goes where, and also maybe manipulating information, which is an interesting thing to kind of rebel from within. And a philosophical reflection would be needed to understand the interplay of qualitative experiences and the images that we get from ourselves, from the AI. So if we look at the self as an assemblage, as something that consists of not only my own qualitative experience, but also of otherness in the sense of exteriorized images in our Fitbit, smartwatches, and so on, and also of even if we have implanted devices or so on, of things that add to our organic bodily lives. And this is something that also needs to be done from a psychological and philosophical perspective to understand how the interplay of this multiplicity of images of our own existence comes about. So I would suggest to close this. Yes, I'm at the end. So that would be an educational problem to develop programs, how we can have this emancipatory take on the technologies that tend to vanish from our vision. And I hope that's at least a somewhat positive outlook on the many problems I put up here. So thank you for your attention.